Hi everyone. So Johanan responded to me again, and before we have a look at the video, I'm gonna have to apologize to people who haven't been following this exchange for, well, not making sense. If I provided setups for all the clips in Johanan's video that I'm gonna show here, this video would be a lot longer. So I'm sorry, but you'll just have to make do. Here we go.
Okay, so from what I gather, you're saying that our perceptions are only a subset of the set of all measurements.
Correct.
This is fair enough. After all, I do agree that things like photodetectors and cameras can make measurements too.
Oh, well, I guess we're done then. That was easy.
But with respect to each individual mind, the photodetector's wave function does not collapse with respect to you until your particular mind collapses it. At least if we are to take QM to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit too easy. How exactly is that the logical conclusion of quantum mechanics? I don't see it. I must be missing something, so can you elaborate?
Our perceptions are subjective sensations, i.e., qualia. But now if we agree nature is all there is, then a substance dualism between mental and material cannot exist.
Agreed. There's no need for substance dualism. As I understand it, and I stress that part, as I understand it, the mental is material. What my mind does reduces to what my brain does, just like what a program running on a computer is doing reduces to what the hardware is doing. I'm sure you have no problem accepting the latter, so I don't understand why the former is so hard to accept. Regarding qualia, as I understand the concept, it's nothing more than a label we put on information that we don't have the means to communicate. I can describe an experience from my past, but I can't give you the actual memory. I can't let you experience the world through my eyes or feel my emotions. But as far as I can tell, this is just because of the limitations of our ways of communicating. If we could develop technology that lets us copy information directly from one brain to another, qualia would be reduced to a completely useless concept. Consider this thought experiment. You're knocked out by a mad scientist, and while you're out, he makes a perfect copy of you. Note that, a perfect copy. You and your copy wake up, and now I ask you, how do you know you're not the copy? You know, the one that has all the information, but not the qualia. The one that remembers the events of the past, but didn't actually experience them. I don't see that there's any way to know.
So if we are to reject substance dualism, there should be no ontological difference between what a perception is and what a measurement is.
A measurement is an interaction between two systems, the outcome of which depends on the states of the systems. My perception is my mind, i.e., my brain, processing information obtained through measurements involving my sensory organs. There is a clear distinction, the part about the information being processed. But this has nothing to do with substance dualism.
Because things that don't have defined locations in space and time don't exist in space or time.
Okay, I really hate to bring up the double slit experiment, but it actually does illustrate the point I'm trying to make here. Consider the case where we don't use a detector, so the particle goes through both slits unobserved. If I understand you correctly, you're saying that it was my act of looking at the screen that caused the particle to be loaded into the simulation and produce the interference pattern on the screen. But why should I see an interference pattern? What we observe is consistent with the particle existing in space and time even prior to observation. If the particle never went through the slits, I shouldn't see an interference pattern. Now, sure, you could propose that the particle is loaded into the simulation along with a history of going through both slits, effectively rewriting history to make it look exactly like it would if I was right. But I suspect Mr. Occam would have something to say about that.
You can't make sense of a spacetime without locations. For example, a center of an empty universe where no particles have locations is both everywhere and nowhere.
I agree, but if we can talk about the probability of finding a particle at a location P, then we can speak meaningfully about P in relation to other locations where there's also a probability of finding the particle.
Yes, context is important, and yes, we do not as of yet have a full quantum gravity theory. However, the context in this particular case is that both major camps of quantum gravity are reaching the same conclusion now regarding spacetime being emergent from information.
Which is something I don't have a problem with. But we're going to disagree about the nature of this information.
Well, if spacetime is not fundamental but emerges from information as suggested by digital physics, I don't see how that is distinguishable from what we would otherwise call a virtual reality.
Okay, I'll spell it out. Affirming the consequent. Premise 1. All virtual realities are digital. This seems reasonable based on our experience with virtual realities. Premise 2. Our reality is digital. Appears to be true. Conclusion, therefore our reality is virtual. Don't you see the fallacy committed here? I mean, even if I accept the premises, the conclusion doesn't necessarily follow. A virtual reality is a simulation. It's virtual as opposed to actual. When was it established that an actual reality cannot also be digital? If this reality isn't an actual reality, then we have no experience with any actual reality, so we can't really make any claims about it, now can we? When was it even established that a non-digital reality can exist? This is why we can't go from reality is digital to therefore reality is virtual.
Let me rephrase this in another way to give you a better angle on it. I can consistently conceive of a possible world wherein mind exists without matter.
That's a masked man fallacy.
But that would mean that you have some lack of knowledge of the conscious experience that makes up your mind.
Okay, let me see if I get this straight. It's not a masked man fallacy because... You know what? I should probably explain this to the audience first. The masked man fallacy is a misapplication of Leibniz's law, which says that if A and B don't share exactly the same properties, then A does not equal B. This is easily misapplied. Lois Lane believes that Superman can fly. She does not believe that Clark Kent can fly. Therefore, Superman and Clark Kent are not the same person. Except that what Lois believes about Superman is not a property of Superman, but of Lois. That's the masked man fallacy. However, if I understand you correctly, you think that because I am consciously aware of the mind simply by virtue of having one, I must be consciously aware of every last detail about it. I would see through the mask, as it were, so the application of Leibniz's law has to be valid. Except it's not, because I'm not consciously aware of everything there is to know about the mind simply because I have one. I can be consciously aware of what it's like to be sick without knowing what disease I'm suffering from or what caused it. Knowing what it's like to be conscious tells me nothing about the underlying mechanism behind the mind, or even if there is one at all, which is the very reason why we can disagree about this issue. Of course we don't. Nor do we have any examples of realities that we know are the products of minds.
Of course you do. When was the last time you had a lucid dream?
Touche. And those minds can be affected by tampering with the brain using anything from chemicals to physical trauma.
Well, that's predicted by idealism, too.
How could it be? I mean, if the mind is independent of the brain, or the brain emerges from the mind, shouldn't I be able to shoot myself in the head without it affecting my mind?
In fact, it fits idealism better. Since there exists a whole host of arguments in philosophy of mind for the immateriality of the mind, it would make sense that an immaterial brain and immaterial trauma, or immaterial chemicals, could interact upon an immaterial mind.
I'll let others who are more familiar with these arguments jump in here in the comment section, but from a cursory reading, none of them seem to lead to the conclusion that the mind is immaterial. I can't find one. 2, 4, and 5 are covered by what I said earlier about qualia, and 3 is irrelevant to the subject of this conversation.
Well, let me make a suggestion. Look at the stuff on emergent spacetime. I know it's not determined what quantum gravity approach is correct yet, but look at them both, and tell me if you think spacetime is emergent, just as a personal opinion or not. Because it looks like at least that part of the picture is a done deal.
Like I said before, I don't have a problem with the idea of spacetime being emergent. The issue is what it might have emerged from. You'd say information in a mind, if I'm not mistaken. I'd say the information that I refer to, somewhat improperly perhaps, as properties of matter. This isn't a problem for me as a materialist. Remember how I defined materialism as the view that everything in physical reality can be reduced to matter, its properties, and its interactions? Well, maybe the matter and the interactions can be further reduced to the properties. I don't know. Maybe I should just call it information, plain and simple, but then it would still be something that would exist independent of conscious perception.
Also, look at the hard problem of consciousness and think about the only ways you can conceive of it being solved.
I did, and I don't see any hard problem. All I see is an assertion: the mind cannot be reduced to matter. I don't see why not. And by the way, using this to support idealism begs the question. You're basically saying that the mind is fundamental, meaning it can't be reduced, because it can't be reduced. To wrap this up, Johanan, I'm sorry it took me so long to reply. I've had a lot to do at work, end of the semester, lots of stuff to do at that time. So, yeah, feel free to get back to me and I'll try to be quicker next time. See ya.